Hello and welcome to section 3.5 of geometry. I know your notes don't have this on here. Don't panic. I've got this. I just wanted to throw this up here. So section 3.5, first of all, is a throwback section to section 3.2. I think it's 3.2. This is going to feel like a deja vu. We've already done this. We're just kind of doing it backwards. So if you had section 3.2 down, 3.5 is going to be easy peasy. So you have found slopes of lines. You've used them to identify parallel and perpendicular lines. This falls into the parallel part of things. This also goes back to our angle pairs, so alternate interiors, all of those. And we are actually proving that lines are parallel. So we're saying, okay, we've got these angles, so that means the lines are parallel. Back in section 3.2, we said, well, if the lines are parallel, then these things must be true. So it's kind of just a backwards 3-2. So the first thing, I know that you've got a table. This is the first box on your table. The converse of the corresponding angles postulate. Remember, you never have to memorize these. You have to know how to use them to set up problems. Converse means we're doing this backwards. So here's what this says. It says, if corresponding angles are congruent, then your lines are parallel. So I've got the little picture in there for you. So our example or our diagram box, I guess I should say, I probably should have switched that. I could say something like, everybody remembers corresponding angles, right? So I could say something like, if angle 1 is congruent to angle 3, then notice in this diagram, we don't have our little triangles to tell us that A and B are parallel. Well, here's what we're doing. We're saying we don't know if A and B are parallel, but if we know that 1 and 3 are congruent, then we can say that A is parallel to B. So we're going backwards. Last time we said A and B are definitely parallel, so what must be congruent? Now I'm going to say these guys are congruent, these angles, so the lines have to be parallel. All the problem setups will be just the same as what we did back then. So of course I could have used angle 5 and 7 or 2 and 4, but we could go through the whole list. If any pair of corresponding angles are congruent, then A and B are parallel. So the parallel postulate, I'm pretty sure I kept all the words in there for you because I didn't feel like this was like super important. If you have a line, so in my example I have line M and a point P that is not on the line. In yours it already has it drawn in there, but it makes sense. If I want to draw a line through P that's parallel to M, there's only one possible line I can draw that goes through P and is parallel to M. Not the most important postulate out there. We won't actually probably use that at all, maybe one time out of 1,000, but I needed to make sure I mentioned it. Then we've got our table. So alternate exterior. So make sure you're in the alternate exterior section. Here's what this says. If alternate exterior angles are congruent, then lines are parallel. I don't know why I didn't use the parallel symbol there. I've got our little diagram. I could have labeled all kinds of angles for alternate exteriors. I only put angles 1 and 3. And then I got this brilliant idea that I could just fill this out. So if, over in that third column, if angle 1 is congruent to angle 3, then P is parallel to Q. Not sure why I have a commas there. If angle 1 and angle 3 are congruent because they're alternate exteriors, then we can say P and Q are parallel. Consecutive interiors, the converse. So notice we've got angles 4 and 5 here. What do you know about consecutive interior angles if the lines are parallel? They have to be supplementary, right? So if consecutive interior angles are supplementary, then we know the lines are parallel. So in my diagram, I've got angles 4 and 5. So I have to say over here, if angle 4 plus angle 5 equals 180, because that's supplementary, remember that's the one oddball, everything else is congruent. If angle 4 plus angle 5 equals 180, then P and Q are parallel. I guess I could even mark these guys up here, 1 and 3. No good way to mark that other than 4 plus 5 equals 180. Alternate interior angles. So the converse, you might already know what this is going to say. If your alternate interior angles are congruent, then your lines are parallel. So therefore, they gave us angles 6 and 8. So I could say something like, if angle 6 is congruent to angle 8, then P is parallel to Q. And I could mark that with my little congruent arcs. And last but not least, my perpendicular transversal converse. I didn't give you any words in this one. If the transversal is parallel to two lines, if a transversal is perpendicular to two lines, then the lines are parallel. So my transversal in this particular example is R, and I've got lines P and Q that are being intersected. Notice R is perpendicular to P, R is perpendicular to Q, therefore P and Q have to be parallel. So I'm going to say it this way. If R is perpendicular to P and R is perpendicular to Q, then these two guys have to be parallel. Again, this feels a lot like section 3.2. That's all the words we've got to say. I've just got some examples. The first one at the bottom of the page. It kind of gives things in weird words. So let's look at how it asks the questions. It's asking the questions backwards, but we're going to use the same concepts. So given that angle 1 is congruent to angle 3, so I'm going to even mark this. Angle 1 is congruent to angle 3. Is it possible to prove that any of the lines shown are parallel? If so, state the postulate or theorem that justifies your answer. Well, here's how I think of this. I've marked 1 and 3 congruent. What kind of angles are angles 1 and 3? Corresponding, right? Corresponding angles. Therefore, if my corresponding angles are congruent, that means that the two lines intersected have to be parallel. Well, this line goes through both of them, so that means that line A and B has to be parallel. Here's your answer for this question. A is parallel to B because of corresponding angles. What if I said, well, let me hold on one second. I'll ask the next question. Because I could ask, well, let me ask anyway. What if I said, if I change the whole problem, and I said that angle 3 is congruent to angle 4? I know they don't look congruent. Maybe, hopefully you see that. But if angle 3 is congruent to angle 4, those guys are alternate interior angles, so I would write that down, and then I would say, well, then B and C have to be parallel because those are the other two lines that make up angles 3 and 4. So remember, we have to be kind of skeptical in geometry, even if it doesn't look it. If it says it, then I can use those postulates or theorems. So on the back, given that measure of angle 1 is 103, and the measure of angle 4 is 100, is it possible to prove that any of the lines shown are parallel? If so, state the postulate or theorem that justifies your answer. Well, those two angles are different angles, right? That's kind of a problem. They would be alternate interior if you ignored this line B for a second. Those would be alternate interior angles, but they're not even congruent. Therefore, I'm going to say no parallel lines. If they were both marked as 103 degrees, I would say, oh, those are alternate interior angles, and then line A would have to be parallel to line C. So hopefully you're getting the hang of those and see kind of what I'm thinking of. So those ones are pretty easy, right? It's just asking you basically what kind of angles they are and what lines then have to be parallel. So let's skip down to this one. The measure of, or find the measure of angle ZYN so that PQ is parallel to MN. Show your work. So if I look at this diagram, I notice I've got X's in here. In order to find the measure of angle ZYN, that's what it asks me to find, wouldn't you agree I'm going to need to figure out what X equals? Right? And then I can plug that in and figure things out. So I'm not even going to worry about that so far. Notice it's asking in a weird way. We want these two lines to be parallel, PQ and MN. Well, in order for that to happen, these two angles have to be congruent. If those two angles are congruent, then the lines will be parallel. So I could get super technical about this. I could say that angle PXW has to be congruent to angle ZYN. If you wanted to write a geometric statement, I am looking for the equation. PXW is 11x minus 25. Replace that congruent with an equal. ZYN is 7x plus 35. Hopefully everybody feels confident solving an equation. I'm going to do two steps at once. If you need to break them up, please feel free to do so. That looks like it's going to be a 4x equals 60. So x must be equal to, I think that's a 15. When I find that x equals 15, am I finished with this problem? No, right? Because it said to find the measure of angle ZYN. I think I've said before, right? The small n means measure of. So to find the measure of angle ZYN. Well, this is angle ZYN. It looks like an obtuse angle to me right here. So if I know x, this is pretty easy. I'm going to plug in that 15. So angle ZYN is equal to 7 times 15 plus another 35. So that math comes out to, I think it's 140. ZYN equals 140. If I plugged in the 15 in for the x up here, I should get a 140 because remember those two angles had to be congruent, so I should get a 140 in both spots. So it's the same setup. We still made those angles equal to each other, but now it's just saying, okay, well, if we do that, then those guys have to be parallel. We've got another problem like that for the next one, but I think probably, hopefully you can see what to do. Notice there's little arrows pointing in. Those look to me like they're alternate interior angles. In order for the lines to be parallel, my alternate interior angles have to be congruent. So it says we want to make GH parallel to RS. I have to have congruent alternate interiors. That is it for section 3.5. I'm hoping that you're finding this section super easy because it feels like section 3.2, just worded a little bit differently. Hopefully I talked you through that. Please keep any questions and ask me, email me, remind text me, or wait for our meeting on whatever day that meeting's going to be. Have a good one. We'll see you next time.